Hi, everybody. I'm Wright-Riggins with the New Baptist Covenant, and I just wanted to welcome each and every one of you to Community Conversation. Let me just remind you for a moment who we are, New Baptist Covenant. The New Baptist Covenant is a consortium of the American Baptist churches, the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and the Progressive National Baptist Convention, as we come together to engage in ministries of justice, and particularly issues around racial justice, as a demonstration project for the kingdom of God in terms of how we relate to each other across theological and racial ethnic boundaries, trying to build bridges towards the beloved community. And it's my privilege to host this gathering where we have a community conversation periodically with movers and shakers in the world and in our community and our communion. And today I'm really excited to have a conversation with Curtis Ramsey Lucas, who serves as editor of the Christian Citizen. So please join me in welcoming Curtis Ramsey Lucas to our stage today as we are engaged in looking at really the intersections between faith and politics, discipleship, and citizenship. And so, Curtis, welcome to Community Conversations. And the first thing I just really want to ask you is, how you holding up and how you dealing with this pandemic and these crazy political times?
Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to join you today, Aitsan. It's good to be here. Well, holding up okay. It's been obviously a very busy time since the beginning of the pandemic. I have, as you may know, worked from home for a number of years. And so not a lot of adjustment there. But as I like to say, I suddenly have a lot of coworkers in my home with my children doing various forms of, online, remote learning, hybrid learning, and all of that. So, but we're doing well.
Fantastic. Well, listen, the Christian Citizen, I believe, is 25 years old this year. And it's really lived at this intersection of doing justice in the midst of faith and extending mercy, and really trying to bring folks together in terms of looking at the intersection with faith and politics and discipleship. And I'm just wondering, if you can just tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to this kind of work and what you're doing now with as editor of the Christian Citizen.
Sure. So I've been with the Home Mission Societies for just a little bit longer than the publication has been in existence, and it is 25 years this year. I started out working in what was then our Office of Governmental Relations in Washington, D.C., sharing the public policy concerns of the Home Mission Societies, then National Ministries, American Baptist Churches USA, and working with other faith-based offices on Capitol Hill in various coalitions of concern around a variety of issues, and have been involved really since the very beginning with the Christian Citizen, not as the editor, but writing for the publication, assisting with some of the editing as well, and then moved into that as a part of my broader portfolio about 10 or 12 years ago. And then more recently assumed that as my primary responsibility in 2017, when we shifted from what was a traditional print periodical to digital first publication with print and some other elements. So it's been the last 4 years really working exclusively on the publication as the editor.
So what was it that brought you in terms of your you came to the American Baptist Home Mission Societies, worked in Office of Governmental Relations, focusing on faith and the intersection of politics and government relations and all those kind of things. What was it that attracted you to do this kind of social kind of ministry?
Well, I think I've always had an interest since college and seminary in the connections between faith and politics, the kind of rootedness in a Christian understanding of human rights and dignity. So those are the things that have always interested me, and I've had the opportunity in a variety of capacities with the home mission societies to work and to explore those passions a little bit further.
Okay, so I know that the primary piece of what the Christian citizen does is really look at that intersection between faith and politics. Can you help us understand what's the difference between the intersection of faith and politics and the marriage of church and state? What's the difference there?
Sure. So in this country, we enjoy the separation of the institutions of church and state, and I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing for people of faith. It's a good thing for government that those institutions are functionally separate from one another. That I think frees us up to be communities of conscience, to be prophetic in our communities and in our society. But that doesn't mean a divorce of faith and politics. I mean, we come as full human beings to the practice of politics. We bring our faith perspective into the way that we think and act politically. So I think on the one hand, what we enjoy is that institutional separation, but that doesn't mean that that faith and politics have to be divorced from one another.
Sometimes I see that happening in our society in what I consider to be a positive way. I'm thinking about the movement, the civil rights movement, and other movements, and how people's faith, or whatever their particular faith may be, informs or drives them in terms of the kind of systemic and structural change that they try to make. But at other times, to me, it seems like it can get pernicious, and I think we saw that as an example of that on January 6th, where I think I would call it the combination of a nationalist, a Christian nationalism that seemed to me to be a disfigurement or a warped understanding of that. So what would be the difference between being a Christian citizen and being a Christian nationalist?
Sure. So I think for me, we talk a lot, we talk about dual citizenship. I think Baptists talk in that language of, we're citizens of a kingdom, not of this world, and we're citizens of the places that we live. And I think that can lead to too great a separation of our faith from our politics, as if we can be good and loyal citizens of both, and we can. But I think for me, Christian citizenship is rooted in this understanding that Paul writes about in Philippians, being citizens of heaven, and expecting a savior from there. That kind of shapes for me everything about what I expect of government, but it also shapes my own engagement in political life, and I think the life of communities of faith, the life of the church. And it's really, for me, thinking in those terms, it's about representing a kingdom not of this world. So, and looking forward to that. The writer of Hebrews talks about persons of faith seeking a better country that is a heavenly one. And I think for me, that stands always over the horizon, but it ought to shape what we expect in this world. It ought to motivate us toward that end, and it ought to inform kind of our temporal citizenship, if you would, our temporary citizenship.
So I know that 25, 26 years ago, you were brought on board with American Baptist Home Mission Society's national ministries, working initially in the Office of Governmental Relations, and then coming to become editor of this digital magazine now that looks at the intersection of faith and politics and discipleship. What would you say to the person in the pew as to why we need to look at why is there, what's critical about this intersection between faith and politics? Why can't we just go to church and leave all of this political stuff alone?
So I think, it's interesting. I always talk about the fact that, there's that saying, we don't talk faith and politics in polite company, right?
Mm.
Those are subjects to avoid. And I think there's some wisdom in that. It's, that's why that saying kind of sticks with us, because those things can be divisive. They can separate us. And yet there's so many things to me in the gospel that are inherently political. Um, and I don't mean that in a partisan way. I mean, this is Jesus came talking about a kingdom of heaven, and a kingdom that we would find in our midst. That's a political term. Paul writes about being ambassadors for Christ. That's political language. And I think that the church needs to recapture that language and understand it, because the church is itself a political community. It's in very real sense an alternative political community in the midst of the communities we're a part of now. So that to me is some of the distinction. It's not so much about partisanship, but it is about being political. And I think also, I mean, just looking at the concepts and around justice and mercy that we see in the Bible, these things. I don't know how, for me, I even have a bit of difficulty with the term social justice, because what other kind of justice is there but social justice? It's about right relationship with God. It's about right relationship with our neighbors. Those are all political concepts and constructs. And so for me, I think we have to kind of engage that language. I think too, I wrote an article a little using the term um, brothers and sisters in the context of the church, and how do
Mm.
we expand that language for greater gender inclusivity. And it was an interesting conversation, because absent from all the responses of folks was any kind of political language that we see very clearly in the writings of Paul and others. You are citizens with the saints. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people. And Paul writes too, very much in Ephesians. He uses this familial language. You're members of the household of God. But there's also this political language, and I think we often talk in the familial language, and that's good and necessary. But we don't often focus on that, the political claims of the gospel, I think.
Wow, you also mentioned two terms just a moment ago. You're talking about justice and mercy, and it reminds me of an article that I just read. That I know you're both the editor of Christian Citizen, but you just wrote an article about the Family Security Act, and I think that both gets at justice and mercy and the nonpartisan aspect of that. Can you talk a little bit about what's that about, and what that particular act is about, and why you wrote that article, and how that a nonpartisan piece?
Yeah, so the Family Security Act is a piece of legislation that was introduced by Mitt Romney, a Republican of Utah, obviously. It's a pretty ambitious uh, proposal that would create a universal child allowance. So rather than a single tax credit for families with children of a certain age that you receive annually, it would create an actual monthly uh, uh, form of support, $250 per child for children ages 6 to 17. Um, and then, there's different levels of that. But what interested me about that is, and I should also say, there's a Democratic proposal. The Romney plan would eliminate some existing tax credits, would make some smaller. It's trying to be deficit neutral, but it would create this monthly child allowance. And the Democratic plan would expand on an existing child tax credit to do something similar, not quite as ambitious in terms of the amount of money involved. But what I thought was interesting about that is, um, child history is persistent. It's been, 50 years above the national average. We've had child poverty, um, sometimes reaching as many as 1 in 5 kids. And so for there to be actual ambitious, serious proposals from both Republicans and Democrats, I think is a positive development. I think something will come of that that will benefit children. And the other thing I look at, historically, um, if you look at the introduction of Social Security um, and some other programs along the way, those programs went a long way to addressing poverty among the elderly.
Right.
Um, and so this is, I think, an effort, and I think a good one to really address child poverty in this country, which has been, I think, scandalous. I mean, the number of kids who grow up impacted by poverty is something we ought to be thinking about. And of course, those things have all been exacerbated by the pandemic and unemployment and things of that kind. I think that's why we're seeing these proposals. But it's a long-standing issue. Again, it's been 50 years of having a child poverty figure that's significantly higher than the poverty rate for the general population.
Curtis, as an African American preacher, I've never had problems in the African American context, say, for instance, talking about things like addressing issues of poverty. Mike 6:8 tells us, that we are to justice and love mercy, walk humbly with God. That it is we need to look out for widows and orphans. We need to be concerned with the least. I have no problem doing it. Now, and in a Black church context, I've often been able to do that. In a white church context, as long as I stay faithful to, quote, the word, I can say, this is what the scripture says. In a Black church context, I can also say that this is one of the reasons why we ought to be looking at the Family Security Act, all right? Whatever manifestation that comes out, whether it's Democrat or Republican, because right. It's addressing the issue of poverty. And that's a scriptural challenge and thing that we ought to be engaged in. But oftentimes we'll find, if I'm in a white congregation or some of my white Christian brothers and sisters in their pulpits may have a more difficult time being able to even bring up that particular piece of legislation and saying that we need to look at that, because oftentimes I think in our white congregations, they will look at that as political or partisan or political in a negative sense, as opposed to part and parcel of what the gospel is all about. And I'm just wondering, in your working with the Christian citizen, do you get those kind of challenges or concerns around racial ethnic lines?
Yeah, I think we do see some of that. We do get some pushback with what we publish. And it does break down some along those lines. I think it goes back again to, in some respects, it goes kind of, I don't want to say misunderstanding of church-state separation, but we kind of say, well, that's political. We don't need to address that, or we ought not to be attending to that. And again, I kind of look at that and say, well, why not? I mean, that's kind of part and parcel of the community and the society that we're in. And to me, I look at it in terms of the gospel speaks to all aspects of our life and all aspects of our life together. And if we are separating out a huge segment of life, what does that say about the gospel? I mean, if we're all, if we're cutting off, well, we can't talk about politics. We can't do that in the pulpit. That seems to me to be highly, problematic. And again, as I was writing in the article, it's not really making a judgment so much about the specifics of one proposal or another. as it is saying, look, these are ambitious proposals, and I think it's a good thing that both parties in Washington are talking about this. I think that's a good and necessary thing. So I think that's where we can address it, is not so much the specifics of the proposal as this is a challenge that we need to face as a society.
I'd mentioned at the outset that the Christian Citizen was launched in, I believe it was 1996, which makes this the 25th year. And I may be wrong with this, but I think this might make the Christian Citizen one of the longest running continuous publications currently at the national level for American Baptists. I don't believe that there is another publication in the denomination that has been ongoing for 25 years now, which says to me that you're obviously fulfilling a real need and of folks out there to have this publication both in print and now in a digital form for folks to still be reading it and plugging into it. So tell us a little bit about who are the people that are subscribing and what are they looking for and what kind of articles can they read in the Christian Citizen that is helpful to them.
Sure. So when we started the publication, it was really an effort to bring together a number of different newsletters and kind of programmatic publications within the home mission societies. And the thinking being, if we put all that in one kind of package, it might have more value to pastors and lay leaders who are receiving it, rather than being inundated with all this stuff. But we pretty quickly turned to focusing more on kinds of broad issues of concern in the magazine. Hunger, homelessness, child poverty, any number of issues of concern. We would dedicate an issue to that and look at it in some depth. And that, of course, was all over throughout the history of it being a print publication. And we would publish 3, 4, sometimes just 2 issues a year doing that. But when we shifted to the digital platform in 2017, late 2017, and started publishing monthly, it really has enabled us to, I think, respond a little bit more quickly to things that are happening in the world. Previously it was several months between issues, and so that was hard to do. But now we are publishing monthly and far more responsive to issues of concern. And I think that's what folks are looking for. They're looking for something that speaks from a faith perspective, that is connected with what's happening in communities. And we do have a very loyal and engaged readership. We see that in what we're publishing digitally. We have also a newsletter that goes out, a weekly newsletter that links to everything that we're currently publishing, as well as what has appeared in the previous week. And we also curate content from other publications that's of interest and connected in some way. So it's exciting to see. I mean, when that goes out, we always see a bump in readership of articles. So, and the audience has been growing since 2017 each year consistently. So it does seem to be meeting a need, and I'm just happy to have been a part of it from the start.
One of the things I appreciate about it, the Christian Citizen, is both the theological diversity, the racial ethnic diversity, and the fact that I'm seeing younger writers and thinkers that are also in there. Could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, the writers that we do have, we've kind of built a stable of writers over the past few years who write on a regular basis for us, and we always have kind of guest pieces as well. We have really been intentional about trying to build a publication that reflects the diversity of American Baptist life, racially and ethnically. And I like to talk in terms of being a place for both established writers as well as emerging writers. We think in terms of, often think in terms of emerging leaders, right? I think about emerging writers, who's coming up that is looking for a place to publish. And today, you know, I mean, everybody can get onto a blog and write, and there's a lot of that. But having a publication that you can work with, I think, is a benefit too, because of course we you know, we engage in a process of editing and fact checking everything we publish, and I think that's good for newer writers to be involved in that process as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that. I know that one of the things I appreciated about Judson Press was it focused a lot on emerging authors, and I could give cite a cavalcade of very esteemed leaders and writers today who 20 years ago people had not heard of.
Right.
It really came up through publishing some of their first books with Judson Press, and I'm seeing the same kind of thing now, even with this publication in the Christian Citizen. So I just really want to thank you for that and addressing emerging leaders as they come up as well. I also, you know, I have a new communication. We have the New Baptist Covenant has new communications. A director by the name of Jenna Antonovich. She has been trying to educate me on hashtags, and I noticed that in a new book that you have just developed, that author and editor of, hashtag in this together. You know, a few years ago I would have just said # in this together, but Jenna's trying to help me come into maybe the 20th century. I'm not at the 21st yet. Hashtag in this together, ministry in times of crisis. What can we expect to see in this publication of yours?
I should note, I was not responsible for that title, except for maybe the ministry in times of crisis part. It was somebody younger than I who said hashtag in this together, and I love that. I mean, it's like every time I write about it on social media, it automatically, you know, comes up as a link. So it's great. So this is a book. It really grew out of content that we began publishing in the spring of last year, right at the sort of outset of the coronavirus pandemic. We went on this run for about a month and a half where we were publishing daily, starting with a firsthand account from a writer from Kirkland, Washington, which was the location of the first deaths in the United States from COVID-19. And that was very early in March. And then we started publishing pieces about, you know, transitioning to online ministry and worship. How do you go about doing that? You know, nuts and bolts kinds of things. You know, articles about providing pastoral care in a context in which you're physically distanced from one another. And so it was a whole series of articles that some of which were quite well received when we published them in the Christian Citizen. And then as the pandemic wore on, of course, we were seeing, you know, very clear evidence of inequity and injustice in our society in terms of the impact of the pandemic, particularly among African Americans and vulnerable populations. So we started to look at some of those issues in articles in the Christian Citizen. And then, of course, over the course of the summer, with the unrest and protests around following the death of George Floyd, we were addressing those things as well. So the idea for the book was really one of how do we pull some of that content together, give it a longer life on a bookshelf in a book of this kind. All that content that we previously published was rewritten, expanded, and we added some additional pieces to it. The sort of guiding thinking around it was asking the question, what are we kind of gleaning from these times we're living in? What are we learning from these crises we're going through? And what wisdom can we draw from that we can apply to the future? That was really the idea. What are we learning about God? What are we learning about ourselves? What are we learning about our nation? What are we learning about the church and ways in which it needs to adapt to, meet needs in the context we're living through? So it's a collection of pieces from Christian citizen writers and others that kind of tries to glean some of the wisdom of what we're living through, and hopefully that'll carry us into the future some.
Well, I think that that's an excellent summary, really, of what the Christian citizen is all about when we talk about the intersection of faith and politics and discipleship in these times of crises, and
Right.
it's a resource to so many people to be able to figure out how do we think and live in these times, and how do we do ministry as well. Could you just kind of wrap us up by giving us an understanding of a couple of things? One, how do we subscribe to this publication? How do we get this book? And if we're interested in writing for the Christian citizen, what do we do?
So the website is christiancitizen.us. If you go there, you'll find links to you'll find the publication itself, obviously. There is a membership link. We just added late last year a member support program that we're calling Christian Citizen Ambassadors. And for a contribution of $25 or more, folks receive the print edition. We publish 2 print editions as well as monthly online. But they would receive the print edition, a copy of In This Together, and some other kind of related resources of the publication. Or folks can also just sign up for our e-newsletter, which is, you'll find the link on the website for that as well. And then again, that comes out weekly when we're publishing new content. I should also mention we have a weekly podcast, and there's a link on the website for that. But that's also accessible on Spotify, Apple Music, and all those different platforms. And that's basically interviews with writers and others about what they're working on and what we're publishing.
Well, Curtis, thank you for that. I will go sign up to become an ambassador right away. I want to be able to. I'm already on the list in terms of receiving the subscriptions. I didn't realize that I can get both the print version as well as the book for a small donation of $25. I like that. I'm going to do that. And let me just pause and just really thank you for your ministry. 26 years plus at American Baptist Home Mission Societies, and doing this ministry, this social ministry, this application of the gospel to our very lives. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your doing this as an American Baptist and in a denominational setting, and really helping us to understand better and to apply better what it means to be a Christian citizen. So on behalf of the New Baptist Covenant and our partners, ABHMS, CBF, Walker Baptist Fellowship, and Progressive National Baptist Convention, let me just thank you so very much. And it's been a pleasure to work with you and to serve alongside of you for these 20-something years. And I just pray you Godspeed in the future.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you for all your support and encouragement and mentorship along the way. This publication wouldn't be what it is today without the leadership that you have provided for so many years.
Thank you, Curtis. Everybody, thank you for being a part of this community conversation, and we look to see you next time. And go online, subscribe to the Christian Citizen, get the book, hashtag or pound sign, In This Together. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Curtis.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.